Hello everyone, my name is Sue. Welcome to my true crime channel. Tonight we're diving deep into the chilling case of Neil Entwhistle, the charming British guy who seemed to have it all, until it all went dark. A young family, an American dream, and a shocking crime that left everyone asking, how could this happen? Let's get into it. Is it possible to marry someone and not really know them? This story shows that it absolutely is. Today's case is about love, loss, and the lengths to which some people will go to hide their lies. Neil Entwhistle was born on September 18, 1978 in England. He and his brother were raised in a working-class family. Their father worked in a mine and was also a local politician, while their mother took care of the home but also worked part-time as a school cook to support the family budget. As Neil grew up, he felt a bit ashamed of his background. Because he achieved outstanding academic results and was the first in his family to pursue higher education, he dreamed of joining a higher social class in the future. He began studying at the University of York, where he chose electronic engineering combined with business management. It was during his studies in 1999 when Neil met Rachel, who was from the United States. She had joined the university rowing team, and that is how they met. She was his peer and had 3 brothers, 2 of whom were stepbrothers and 2 stepsisters. Her father had died when she was still a child, and her mother remarried, creating a blended family. As a teenager, Rachel had many passions and ideas about her future. She was a star on her school's track and field team, an excellent swimmer, training to become a lifeguard, and was interested in law, dreaming of attending law school. Eventually, she decided to study English literature and went to York on a student exchange program where she met Neil. The two were initially drawn together by their shared love of sport. Interestingly, when Rachel joined the university's rowing team, it was the men's team, but Rachel was so skilled in the sport that the students had no objection to her joining them. She brought a lot of positive energy to the team. Her personality was a breath of fresh air, and the entire men's team enjoyed her company. Neil, who was more reserved and calm, also appreciated her presence. Despite their different temperaments, something drew them to each other, and soon they became a couple. Neil didn't hide the fact that he took the relationship very seriously. He often introduced Rachel as the woman he intended to spend the rest of his life with. Rachel was also enchanted by him. She appreciated that Neil was very polite, always opened doors for her, kept his promises, and openly adored her. Time passed quickly, and the foreign exchange program came to an end. In the summer of 2000, Rachel had to return to America to complete her final year of studies. The separation made her realize how much she missed her English boyfriend. She confessed to her friends that she had likely found the love of her life and was sure she wanted to return to him. And so she did. The bond between Rachel and Neil was strong enough to survive the distance. By 2001, Rachel returned to the UK, where she and Neil rented an apartment in Birmingham. Rachel started working as an English teacher, while Neil began his career in a company connected to the British Army's Research and Development Division, holding an important and responsible position. The couple was very happy together. One day, Neil posted online, "Wedding with the most amazing woman in the world this summer." This turned out to be an announcement, as on August 10th, 2003, during a fairy tale ceremony, the couple vowed to love each other for life. They spent their honeymoon traveling around the Mediterranean. Rachel and Neil were fulfilled, both personally and professionally, so they decided it was time for the next step. They wanted to start a family, and just a year after the wedding, Rachel became pregnant. In April 2005, their dream came true when their daughter Lillian was born. Rachel created a special website to post family photos for their loved ones in America, including her parents, who wanted to see their granddaughter as often as possible. The site was filled with portraits of a happy family, It seemed that the three of them were the perfect family, even though the differences in their personalities were still very noticeable. Rachel, although not originally from England, had adapted well. She had built such fantastic relationships with her students that even when she was at home with her daughter and not working temporarily, they would sometimes call their favorite English teacher for help. She also had a close-knit group of friends, including other teachers and students as mothers. Neil, on the other hand, remained a loner and struggled with insecurities about his background. He was convinced that he couldn't fully advance in his career and wasn't sufficiently appreciated at work because of his accent. He believed it was clear that he came from a working-class family, which limited him. This increasingly weighed on him, and he felt that the only solution was to leave Britain for a while and move to the USA. Rachel reacted to this idea with enthusiasm, wanting to support her husband and missing her family and friends. She knew her parents would be very happy to see their granddaughter and daughter more often. Of course, saying goodbye to her English friends and students was very difficult for her, but she was happy that she would be able to raise her daughter in the place where she herself had grown up, a place that was closest to her heart. Neil arranged with his employer to work remotely and to keep a salary of $10,000 a month. In September 2005, the family of three moved to the United States. Initially, they stayed with Rachel's mother and stepfather. The grandparents were thrilled, spoiling little Lillian every day and joyfully spending every moment with her. The sight of Rachel's stepfather with the little girl was heartwarming, as his appearance suggested a completely different personality. Joe was a very tall and burly man with a stern expression, and he was also an avid gun collector. The moments when he cuddled and entertained his granddaughter with a twinkle in his eye brought smiles to the faces of all who witnessed it. Joe also tried to bond with his son-in-law, attempting to share his passion. He showed Neil antique firearms and invited him to join in target shooting at a shooting range, which Neil eagerly agreed to. Neil began searching for a new job in their current location, but his interviews did not end successfully. At one point, he even attempted to start his own business. He created a website advertising his technology services, but in reality, he was not prepared for this and lacked the proper equipment. After a few months, they decided to move out of Rachel's parents' home and rented a house in the suburbs of Boston in Hopkinton, Massachusetts. Neil signed a short-term lease, setting the rent at $2,700. This time was meant to allow him to transfer his foreign accounts to the US, and the funds in those accounts were intended to be used to purchase their own property. The rented house was very comfortable. It had 4 bedrooms, high ceilings, was nearly new, and even had a hot tub in the garden. The only thing it lacked was furniture, which they bought. By mid-January 2006, everything was ready, and the family of 3 moved into their new home. They also rented a white BMW. Wanting to celebrate the new chapter in their lives, Rachel arranged a meeting with her friends and invited them over. In the days leading up to the gathering, she focused on unpacking everything, cleaning the house and preparing it for guests. Before the planned meeting, she also arranged to have lunch with her mother to thank her for helping organize the new space. On January the 21st, 2006, the Hopkinton police received a missing person report. A woman called saying she couldn't reach her friend Rachel, who was supposed to be at home with her husband and their 9-month-old daughter. The couple had invited several people over for dinner that day, but no one greeted them at the agreed-upon time. Despite the house being fully lit and Rachel's phone ringing inside, no one answered. The guest noticed a note on the door with a brief message from Rachel's mother, asking for her to call. It turned out that she had also not been able to reach Rachel, despite their scheduled meeting. Furthermore, she had not been able to contact her since Friday. The woman decided to notify the police together. The officers took the report and visited the family's home, but no one answered the door. The doors were locked, but through the window they could see that in addition to the lights, the television was also on. Since it was winter, carbon monoxide-related incidents were quite common, so the police decided to enter the home. However, a quick inspection of the interior revealed nothing suspicious. Classical music was playing in the child's room, and there was a bathtub filled with water in the bathroom. Everything looked as though the parents had planned to bath their daughter, but had unexpectedly had to leave. The officers noticed a pile of bedding on the bed in the master bedroom, blankets and comforters tossed as if someone had just been sleeping there, but there was no one in the house, and the garage was empty. The officers checked the license plate of the vehicle the couple drove to see if there had been any accidents, but they couldn't find any information. In this situation, the police had little they could do. There were no laws preventing adults from leaving without notifying their family. Everything indicated that the couple had suddenly left with their daughter. In response to the missing person report, the police released a brief notice describing the situation and providing the couple's car registration number, ensuring that if another police unit spotted the vehicle, the local officers would be notified. However, Rachel's friends and family were deeply unsettled. Rachel had close relationships with them, and it was unimaginable that she would leave without informing them. Rachel's stepfather decided to leverage his connections, calling an old neighbor and longtime friend who was a retired police officer and former lead investigator in the Crime Prevention and Control Unit at the District Attorney's Office. The officer assured him that he would make a few important calls and warned him against entering Rachel's home, explaining that there might be crucial evidence that should not be disturbed. This call from a high-ranking detective immediately accelerated the investigation. The police began interviewing neighbors, and eventually they decided to enter the Entwhistle home once more. But this time, a foul odor struck them as soon as they crossed the threshold. It quickly became clear that the smell was coming from the upper floor. As the officers climbed the stairs, the stench became unbearable near the master bedroom door. Inside, everything appeared as it had before. One of the officers approached the bed and gently lifted the hastily thrown blanket, immediately spotting a woman's foot beneath it. Upon pulling back more of the bedding, they discovered two bodies, 27-year-old Rachel curled up in the fetal position, and 9-month-old Lillian lying beside her. The medical examiner was called to the scene. The autopsies revealed that Rachel had died from a gunshot wound to the head, while her daughter had been shot in the abdomen. The bullet had passed through the baby's tiny body and then struck her mother in the chest. Additionally, numerous bruises were found on the baby's face, suggesting that she had been severely hit or beaten. The investigation quickly located the family's car at the airport parking lot. Although the doors were locked, the keys were still in the ignition. Inside the car, the police found the keys to Rachel's parents' house, but there were no traces of blood. At this point, it was clear that Rachel and Lillian's bodies had been found in the Entwhistle home, but Neil was nowhere to be found. Given that the car was at the airport, investigators assumed that Neil had fled. It was only now that Rachel's parents realized how little they knew about their son-in-law. They had never fully understood what he did for a living, something related to computers, but he had never clearly explained. Now another detail struck them as suspicious. He never paid in cash, always using credit cards. He had assured them he had money, but it was supposedly tied up in overseas accounts. Unexpectedly, Rachel's parents received a call from Neil's father, who claimed that Neil had contacted him, saying he had left the house for 20 minutes and when he returned his wife and daughter were already dead. He allegedly called the police and then went to Rachel's parents' house, but found no one home. Confused and scared, he called his father from the airport and informed him that he was returning to England. Shortly after, Neil himself called Rachel's stepfather Joe, telling him the same story, but omitting the part about calling the police. Neil likely realized that Joe was involved enough in the investigation to know that no such call had been made. The police held a press conference to inform the public of the tragic events, though they emphasized that there was no official suspect at that stage. Investigators contacted Neil, who was staying at his parents' home, and conducted a 2-hour interview. Neil confirmed that he knew his family was dead.
Neil, when you found them...
Were they right on top of the bed?
No, they were... The covers were partially up. When I walked in, I couldn't see Lily. I could only see Rachel, and she just looked asleep. And then as I got closer, I could see the blood. And I pulled the covers back, and that's when I saw Lily was such a mess. I went downstairs and I took one of the knives out of the block of knives I had in the kitchen.
Yes.
So, maybe I could, but I just didn't have the courage to do it. I then got in the car and started to drive towards Carver. I knew that Joe has guns in the house. I thought maybe I could kind of get myself that way.
What did you do then? Did you go to Joe's?
And I got to the house, but I couldn't get in the house. I thought, well, probably the best bet. I don't know where Joe works, but I didn't know where Priscilla works, so I thought I would drive up to go find Priscilla to, let her know. And then, but as I drove up, I couldn't remember how to get there, and drove around for quite a while. And I'm not quite sure what was going through my mind at that point. I ended up at Logan Airport.
Okay.
Neil spent the next 2 weeks at his family's home. During this time, Rachel and Lillian's funeral took place, attended by over 500 people, but Neil's absence caused considerable controversy. After the phone interview, the police felt they had many leads to follow. They particularly noted that Neil had mentioned his father-in-law's gun collection several times. Deciding to investigate further, they conducted specialized tests in a lab and confirmed that Rachel and Lillian had been shot with one of Joe's guns. Moreover, DNA found on the weapon matched Neil's DNA. In addition, Rachel's DNA was found on the front and inside the barrel of the gun, indicating that the weapon was very close to her when she was shot in the head. On January the 25th, detectives leading the investigation traveled to England to meet Neil at the American Embassy. Despite the confirmed appointment, Neil did not show up at the agreed location, and it was discovered that he no longer lived with his parents. On February the 9th, he was arrested after British authorities located him at a London Underground station. Investigators secured his laptop and searched the hard drive, uncovering what amounted to a second secret life. It turned out that Neil had not been working remotely after moving to America. In fact, he had resigned from his job before leaving, citing family matters as the reason. Over several years, he had created several websites offering get-rich-quick schemes. Having once fallen victim to such a scam himself, he suddenly decided that it was a great business idea. He sold a starter kit for $2,000 that supposedly enabled buyers to earn $2 million annually. But that wasn't all. Neil also created websites offering access to pornographic films for a small fee and methods for natural penis enlargement. Interestingly, he made some money from these ventures, which helped him get by when he was unemployed, but it wasn't enough. He then decided to start living on credit. However, he didn't stop searching for a profitable, though not necessarily legal, business. He began selling software copies and textbooks on eBay. At some point, however, he stopped sending the purchased items to users, leading eBay to block his account and launch an investigation. Neil also regularly visited various websites with perverse erotic content and searched online for companionship. He even went so far as to register on the Adult Friend Finder's website, where he posted a naked picture of himself, taken in his in-laws' garden. By the time his wife and daughter died, Neil had accumulated significant credit card debt. Rachel's family released a statement read at a press conference expressing their shock and heartbreak. The statement said that Rachel and Lillian loved Neil very much and trusted him as a husband and father. The family was devastated and could not comprehend how such love and trust had been so deeply betrayed. The prosecutor presented the most likely version of events. On the morning of Friday, January the 20th, Neil used the gun he had taken without his father-in-law's consent and shot his wife in the head while she lay in bed in their rented home. He then fired a second shot into Lillian's abdomen. Later that same day, Neil returned the gun to his in-laws' house and prepared to flee the country, piecing together funds for the trip from credit cards. He purchased a ticket to London, left for the airport around 5 a.m. on Saturday, January the 21st, and boarded a plane that departed at 8:15 a.m. The next day, the police discovered the bodies. The unemployed computer technician had been facing financial difficulties due to debts in his native England and failing online businesses in the United States. He had no money or tangible assets, yet he and his wife had rented a house for $2,700 a month just days before the murders. Meanwhile, Neil's online ventures were collapsing. His eBay business had been shut down in early January following a series of customer complaints. The couple had moved from England to the United States the previous summer, but neither had held a job since, and their bills continued to mount. Neil was charged with double murder and extradited to the United States. He pleaded not guilty and changed his account of events. This time he claimed that when he returned home from shopping, he found his wife and daughter dead, with a gun belonging to his father-in-law near the bodies, implying that Rachel had committed suicide. How did the gun end up back at her parents' house? Neil admitted that he had placed it there himself to protect his wife's reputation, knowing that people would judge her for killing little Lillian. However, his version of events sounded absurd. Given the position of the bodies, Rachel would have had to hold her daughter with her left hand, aim at Lillian's abdomen with her right hand, fire a shot that would pass through the child and into herself, then position the gun against her own head and pull the trigger. Analyzing the gun's dimensions, such an action was physically impossible, leading investigators to catch Neil in another lie. Before the trial began, Neil's defense attorney filed a motion for him to be released on bail, so he could return to England and await trial at his parents' home. The court denied this request. The defense then sought to exclude all evidence collected from the couple's home, arguing that the police had entered without a warrant, but this motion was also denied. The trial began in June 2008, 2.5 years after Rachel and Lillian's deaths. The prosecution's case relied primarily on circumstantial evidence, though the DNA traces found on the gun were undeniable. The prosecutor also pointed to the obvious motive behind the crime. The family's life was not as ideal as it seemed to everyone, because Neil was not who he pretended to be. In the courtroom, all of his online scams were revealed, including his obsession with erotic websites and conversations indicating that he was searching for sex online. Most shockingly, an expert testified that 4 days before the murders, a password-protected file was created on Neil's laptop. During that time, he was searching for topics related to crimes involving the use of a knife. The prosecution also focused on Neil's behavior after the death of his wife and daughter. He made multiple attempts to withdraw money from ATMs, but the limit on the couple's joint account had been exceeded, so he was only able to withdraw $800 using a credit card. On the same day, he purchased a one-way ticket to England. The prosecutor emphasized that Neil did not call emergency services or inform his in-laws that their daughter and granddaughter were dead. Instead, he left them at home and fled, only calling his father-in-law the next day from the UK. Joe, Neil's father-in-law, testified that during one of their conversations after the truth had come out, they tried to discuss funeral arrangements. Joe told the court that he thought he heard something suspicious, but at the time he wanted to believe it was just a slip of the tongue. Neil had asked if Rachel and Lillian could be buried together, adding, "Because that's how I left them. That's how I found them." The prosecution portrayed Neil as a cold-hearted killer, a fraud, and a failed husband and father who shot his wife and child in their own bedroom. The defense, however, sought to counter this image by arguing that Neil loved his daughter and wife, and that everything he did and said afterwards was driven by that love. All the witnesses testified that the marriage seemed happy, that Neil and Rachel were friends who loved and respected each other. No one knew about Neil's double life, and probably Rachel didn't either. The defense did not call any witnesses, and Neil declined to present his version of events to the jury. However, his lawyers tried to convince the jury that perhaps Rachel was not a content young mother. Maybe she was actually suffering from postpartum depression or feeling isolated after leaving her life in England behind. The attorney suggested that this case might not be a double murder, but a murder-suicide. They argued that Rachel might have killed her daughter first and then herself. According to the defense, this theory was supported by the presence of gunshot residue on both of Rachel's hands. On the other hand, no such residue was found in the items Neil had touched that day. The defense also mentioned that although Neil did not attend the funeral, he visited the place where he had proposed to Rachel during that time. They accused the prosecution of having only one suspect from the beginning and never considering the case from a broader perspective. The jury had to decide whether Neil was a fraudster, a sexually frustrated husband drowning in debt who decided to murder his wife and child before the truth came out, or a loving, devoted husband who fought to protect his wife's reputation. The verdict was delivered on June 25, 2008. Neil was found guilty of all charges and sentenced to life imprisonment without the possibility of parole. Neil's parents stood by him, devastated, believing in their son's innocence and supporting the theory that Rachel had committed suicide. The verdict was appealed, and Neil argued that the evidence collected during the search of the home without a warrant should have been excluded from the trial. However, the appeal was rejected in August 2012, and in January 2013, the U.S. Supreme Court refused to hear the case, effectively exhausting all legal avenues. In August 2023, Neil filed a petition for permission to appeal the decision. In the petition, he referenced an interview given by one of the jurors after the 2008 verdict. The juror had said that she and Rachel were the same height, and if they had the same arm length, and she held a gun to her head and fired, she would have had burn marks all over her face. Neil claimed that this unnecessary reconstruction experiment, in which the juror compared her height to Rachel's and speculated about their arm lengths, deprived him of the right to have the jury make their decision based on the evidence presented at trial. In accordance with the rules of evidence, at this time there is no further information on the case, and Neil continues to serve his life sentence.
The sentence for first-degree murder is fixed by law. It is life without the possibility of parole. I understand the rationale of the Commonwealth's recommendation and Priscilla Matarazzo's request that consecutive sentences be imposed, in that it recognizes symbolically that that there is more than one victim. But I'm concerned that if consecutive sentences are imposed, people who are not familiar with Massachusetts law will have the erroneous impression that there is a possibility of release from prison on a sentence of first-degree murder when there is not. As a matter of law, a sentence for first-degree murder is an actual life sentence. Absent a pardon by the governor, there is no possibility of release from prison. A consecutive sentence would be purely symbolic. For that reason, I am imposing concurrent sentences for the murders of Rachel and Lillian Entwhistle. That means that the defendant will serve, the actual sentence that the defendant will serve will be for both murders. In addition, I am going to impose a period of probation concurrent on the charges of possession of ammunition and possession of a firearm, with a condition that the defendant not profit in any way from the sale of his story, either by way of book or otherwise, to any media outlet. That is the sentence that will be imposed.
Are you surprised by the verdict or disappointed?
We wish to make the following statement.
We know that our son Neil is innocent, and we are devastated to learn that the evidence points to Rachel murdering our grandchild and then committing suicide. I knew Rachel was depressed. Our son will now go to jail for loving, honouring and protecting his wife's memory.
How did you complete it, Joe?
From the moment the Matarazzo spokesman, Joe Flaherty, stated, and I quote, "All we need now is the right jury pool. We knew Neil would not receive a fair trial. We will continue to fight for our innocent son with the hope that one day justice will prevail."
We just want to give some information about the Run for the Roses on October 3rd.
We're having an event sponsored by the Braintree Moose Lodge, Run for the Roses, in memory of my daughter and granddaughter, Rachel and Lillian Rose Entwhistle, in an attempt to raise awareness for domestic violence and child abuse. All of the donations will go toward the charities for domestic violence and child abuse, specifically the Norfolk Advocate for Children's. And all are welcome to attend. With anybody, you can, they're motorcycle, cars, bicycles, or foot, any way you want to come. We'd love to have you on the run or at the end of the event, where we're having raffles and food and just a day to enjoy with your family.
We are just trying to get the message out there about domestic violence and child abuse, and that there is quite a bit of it that is out there. A lot of it isn't brought to light, but I guess our main goal is to let people know that there are places that they can go and get help before anything turns into a tragedy.
Further information, we have a website, www.runfortheroses.com, with a dash in between each of the words, and all of the information and the route is listed on there.
As we close today, I want us to remember that behind every case are real people, families, and lives forever changed. The story of Rachel Entwhistle is a tragic reminder of the vulnerability and strength of the human spirit. Let's hold on to the hope that justice can bring some measure of peace. May her memory inspire us to be more compassionate and more vigilant in our own lives. Thank you for watching. Please let me know your thoughts on this case. If you enjoyed this episode, please hit the like, subscribe, and notification bell so that you don't miss any further episodes. Till next time, take care and stay safe.